mandatory overtime. The abuse and misuse of mandatory overtime is becoming a nationwide epidemic for the nursing career. Many hospitals are facing huge shortages of nurses, and employers are using mandatory overtime to supplement the workload for hospitals. And according to researcher and author Annette Bernhardt, of workers asked to report early or stay late, 70% had an off-the-clock violation, which means they receive no pay for the work that they performed outside their regular shift. And this is happening all over the place because the hospitals need more people, but they don't have any more people, so the same people are having to work more time. And there's a lot of illegal wage theft when people work longer shifts because employers are not paying for the correct overtime. Okay, my essential question is, how do I evaluate the effects of mandatory overtime for nurses, and how will it affect my nursing career? So I was just basically wondering, I was in my internship and they were talking about how they stay all the time late to finish things in the office, and they don't ever get paid. And so I wanted to see if that was gonna happen to me in my future career. So that is why I picked this. I assumed that mandatory overtime is frequently used in hospitals and clinics all over the country, and that mandatory overtime is thoroughly discussed in contracts and things like that, that you know you're supposed to do overtime, but sometimes the nurses aren't aware that they're gonna have to do this, and yeah. For the major part of my research, I use articles that you have to make annotated bibliographies for, and I found that of a study of 4,387 workers, 76% of workers were not paid the legally required overtime. So the mistreatment of workers is at a peak right now, and the regulations in place for overtime are insufficient to protect workers. And they estimate that every week about 1.1 million workers in Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York City experience minimum wage, overtime, or other paid violations, resulting in $56.4 million in wage theft. Also, in an article called "The Presence of Nurse Mandatory Overtime Regulations in Nurse and Patient Outcomes," the author describes a study correlating nurse fatigue and patient injuries. It talks about how the amount of hours of mandatory overtime that nurses work increase the odds of patient injuries and nurse injuries. Fatigue that comes with working mandatory overtime is likely to cause a loss of focus that increases the chance of medical errors. I discovered that mandatory overtime ethics has become an epidemic for working class America. Mandatory overtime is happening, and employers aren't following the proper regulations regarding mandatory overtime pay, and employers are cheating the pay system, and actions need to be taken. We know that this is a big problem in America today because the new Department of Labor legislation that came out in 2016 is tightening the rules of overtime in order to eliminate the negative effects of overtime. So basically, I have an infographic of the new overtime rules. So these new rules are designed to help protect employees from overtime wage theft. And so used to, people who made $23,660
Yay!